I got back home for Thanksgiving. The house was empty, except for my husband's stepfather in a rocking chair. A note said, "Went on a cruise with my ex. You'll stay here and take care of stepdad. He needs you." The stepfather opened an eye and said, "Shall we begin?" I nodded. 4 days later my husband was begging. The note trembled in my fingers as blood drained from my fingers, as blood drained from my face. Gone on a Caribbean cruise with Chloe. Mom decided to come along since she needed a break. "You'll stay home and take care of Arthur. He needs you back by Monday. Ethan." I read it twice. Sure, there must be some mistake. The paper fluttered to the kitchen counter, and my hand went numb. "He's not coming back till Monday, is he?" The raspy voice behind me made me jump. I turned and saw Arthur watching me from the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane, but his eyes were way too alert for the decrepit old man Ethan had described. "No," I managed, my voice barely audible. "No one is. They've all gone on a cruise." Arthur nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this exact scenario. "They left you with the dirty work, didn't they?" Classic Ethan move. I'd arrived at the Miller family home just 30 minutes earlier. My car was packed with gifts and stuff for Thanksgiving dinner. The silent house should have been my first clue. No delicious smells of roasting turkey, no football game blaring from the living room TV, no cheerful greetings. Instead, I only found an unheated house and Ethan's stepfather sitting alone in a rocking chair, looking at me with those uncomfortably perceptive blue eyes. "I don't get it," I said, sinking into a kitchen chair. "We've been planning this Thanksgiving dinner for months. His mom was supposed to host. Everyone was coming." I pulled out my phone and tried Ethan's number again. It went straight to voicemail, just like the previous 3 times. Arthur shuffled to the fridge and pulled out a pitcher of water. "It's been like this all week, quiet as a tomb. They left Tuesday morning." He poured himself a glass with slightly shaky hands. "They didn't even stock the fridge properly. Hope you brought groceries." I hadn't. I'd brought cranberries, sweet potatoes, and my special apple pie ingredients, which were supposed to be for a family feast, not provisions for an abandoned holiday. My phone pinged with a notification. With a surge of hope, thinking it might be Ethan, I quickly checked it. Instead, it was an Instagram alert. Ethan's sister had tagged him in a photo. With trembling fingers, I opened the app. The image knocked the wind out of me. Ethan was standing on a cruise ship deck, his arm around a young blonde woman I recognized as Chloe, his work colleague he'd mentioned more and more often these past months. They were holding champagne flutes, toasting the camera. The caption read, "New Beginnings Caribbean Getaway with Ethan Miller and Family." Family. The words stung like salt in an open wound. I scrolled through more photos. There was Ethan's mother, Brenda, sipping a cocktail, looking nothing like someone who needed a break from caring for Arthur. Another photo showed Ethan and Chloe at what looked like a romantic dinner. The post was time-stamped 2 days ago, which meant this had been planned long before Ethan told me we were expected at his mother's for Thanksgiving. "Find anything interesting?" Arthur asked, studying my face. I turned the phone screen toward him. "They're on a cruise with Chloe from his office. The one he said was just a colleague." My voice cracked. "They'd been planning this while I was buying gifts and taking time off work for what I thought was a family Thanksgiving." Arthur nodded grimly. "Chloe's been in the picture for at least 3 months. She's called here asking for Ethan several times." Pretty voice. Terrible laugh. I stared at him. "You knew." "I know a lot of things they don't think I notice." He tapped his temple with a gnarled finger. My mind's still sharp, despite what Ethan tells everyone. My thoughts raced to our bank account. With shaking hands, I opened our banking app. 3 days ago, a $5,200 withdrawal, almost our entire savings, money we'd been putting aside for a down payment on a house. The house Ethan had promised we'd start looking for after the holidays. "He took our savings," I whispered, showing Arthur the screen. "All of it." Arthur wasn't surprised. "They've been doing the same to me for years. Taking a little here, a little there, for your care, Arthur, they say. Meanwhile, the heat's turned down to save money. My meds are sometimes delayed, and Brenda buys herself another designer purse." I felt sick. This wasn't just about a ruined Thanksgiving or even the betrayal of an affair. This was calculated abandonment of me, of Arthur, of responsibilities and promises. My phone rang. My best friend Sarah called to wish me happy Thanksgiving. I silenced it, unable to explain this humiliation just yet. "There's leftover soup," Arthur offered. "Not much of a Thanksgiving feast, but it'll do." I looked around the kitchen. Dirty dishes in the sink, empty takeout containers on the counter. They hadn't even cleaned up before leaving. Something hardened inside me. "No," I said firmly. "We deserve better than leftover soup." I grabbed my coat and purse. "I'm heading to the grocery store. They might still have some turkey breasts and potatoes. We're having a proper meal today." Arthur looked surprised, then pleased. Haven't had a home-cooked meal in months. Ethan always brings fast food when he bothers to come by at the grocery store. My mind whirled with questions and emotions. How long had Ethan been planning to leave me? Was our whole 5-year marriage just a convenient arrangement he could ditch when something better came along? I mechanically picked out a small turkey breast, potatoes, and some vegetables, barely noticing the other last-minute shoppers around me. When I returned, Arthur had managed to clear the kitchen counter and was sitting at the table with a stack of papers. "What's all this?" I asked, setting down the groceries. "Evidence," he replied, his blue eyes suddenly steely. "Bank statements, medical records, documented neglect. I've been keeping track for months." He pushed a folder toward me. "Ethan and Brenda think I'm just a burden waiting to die. They don't know I've been watching them strip my accounts while providing minimum care." I glanced at the papers, detailed notes, account statements showing suspicious transfers, copies of medical recommendations that had been ignored. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, unsettled by his methodical documentation. Arthur leaned forward, suddenly looking less frail. "Because you've been wronged too, Jade, and because I don't have much time left." He tapped a medical report. "Terminal cancer, 3 months at most." I sat down heavily across from him. "I'm so sorry, Arthur." He waved away my sympathy. "Don't be sorry. Be smart." He looked at me with unexpected intensity. "They think they've left you with a burden, but they've actually given us an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" Arthur's thin lips curved into a smile that transformed his face. "For justice." He reached for an envelope and slid it across the table. "Inside are my real will and trust documents, not the one Ethan and Brenda think exists." I didn't touch the envelope. "Arthur, I don't understand." He leaned back in his chair and studied me. After a moment, he simply said, "Shall we begin?" Those 3 words hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility and hidden meaning. Before I could respond, he explained his proposition. Help him document the family's neglect and betrayal, assist with his final arrangements, and he would ensure I'd be taken care of financially after he was gone. The family who abandoned us both would lose everything they thought was coming to them. I stared at him, this man I barely knew, but with whom I suddenly shared a profound connection. We had both been deceived and discarded by the same people. Outside, the late afternoon shadows lengthened across an empty driveway where a family should have gathered. Inside, an unexpected alliance was forming. "Yes," I said finally, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Let's begin." After our agreement, Arthur sank back in his chair, exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. The excitement of our newfound alliance had temporarily energized him, but now the fatigue returned to his face. "You should rest," I said, noticing the pallor beneath his weathered skin. "I'll finish making our dinner." Arthur shook his head. "First, there's something you need to see." He pushed himself up with effort. "My medical records. You need to understand what we're working with and how little time we have." He led me to a small bedroom that had clearly once been an office, but was turned into a makeshift sleeping space. A hospital bed was in one corner, though Arthur hadn't been using it. Instead, a regular twin bed against the opposite wall showed signs of use. "Can't stand that contraption," he explained, gesturing at the hospital bed. "Makes me feel like I'm already in hospice." From a locked drawer in the desk, Arthur pulled out a thick folder simply labeled medical. He handed it to me without ceremony. "Pancreatic cancer," he said flatly as I opened it. "Stage 4 diagnosed 3 months ago." I scanned the documents, my stomach tightening at the clinical descriptions and grim prognosis. Various oncologist notes, treatment recommendations, and scan results told the unmistakable story of a terminal illness. 2 months, Arthur added. "Maybe less now." The last scan showed rapid progression. I looked up sharply. "Ethan knows this." "Oh, yes, they all do. His mother was at the appointment when we got the diagnosis. 2 days later, she started talking about how she needed a break from caretaking." His laugh held no humor. 66 years old and claiming exhaustion while I'm dying at 78. The cruelty of it struck me like a physical blow. They abandoned you knowing you only had months left, weeks more likely. Arthur eased himself onto the edge of the bed. "But that's not even the worst of it. Look at the medication list." I flipped to the prescription sheets. Multiple medications were listed. Pain management, anti-nausea drugs, enzymes to help with digestion. "Check the bathroom cabinet," Arthur directed. "Compare what's there with what should be there." In the adjoining bathroom, I found a disorganized collection of pill bottles. As I examined them and compared with the documentation, disturbing discrepancies emerged. The strong pain medication had been refilled twice according to the pharmacy labels, but the bottle was nearly full. The expensive enzyme supplements were only half full when they should have been almost untouched, based on the refill date. They've been diluting them, Arthur confirmed when I returned with the evidence. 1 pill instead of 2, half doses of the pain medication, and those appointments for the palliative care specialist. Too expensive, Brenda said. My hands trembled with anger as I returned the documentation to its folder. That's not just neglect, Arthur, that's abuse. It's what happens when people see you as an obstacle rather than a person. He pulled a small notebook from beneath his pillow and handed it to me. I've been keeping track. Times when medications were missed or reduced, appointments cancelled, money that disappeared from my checking account for home care supplies that never materialized. The meticulous documentation stunned me. Pages of dates, times, specific incidents. Despite his illness, Arthur's mind remained razor sharp. Let me fix you something to eat, I said, needing a moment to process everything. You must be hungry. In the kitchen I found pitiful supplies, a few cans of soup, some stale bread, milk on the verge of spoiling. From my grocery run, I managed to put together a decent meal of roasted turkey breast, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Not the Thanksgiving feast I'd planned, but far better than leftover soup. As we ate at the small kitchen table, Arthur studied me. Tell me about your marriage, he said finally. When did you first notice Ethan wasn't who you thought he was? The directness of the question caught me off guard. I poked at my food, considering how to answer. It was gradual, I admitted. When we first met, Ethan was attentive, supportive of my graphic design work. I was building my client base, had my own small studio apartment, good friends. I paused, realizing how much had changed. After we married, he suggested I work from home to save on studio rent. It made sense financially, but then my equipment kept having issues, computer problems, software glitches. Arthur nodded knowingly. Isolation tactic. Exactly. Then came suggestions about which clients weren't worth my time. Concerns about me being out late with friends. He checked my phone, claiming he was just looking for a number. The patterns were so clear looking back. When my father died last year and left me $30, Ethan insisted, we put it in our joint account for our future. That money was supposed to be for our house down payment. The money he just spent on a cruise with another woman, Arthur added quietly. I set down my fork, appetite gone. 6 years of my life, and now I find out he's been planning to leave me while spending our savings on his coworker. People like Ethan and Brenda see relationships as transactions. Arthur said, I learned that too late with her. I was already successful when we met. I was widowed with a comfortable portfolio from my banking career. She was charming, beautiful, and Ethan was just a teenager who seemed to need a father figure. He sighed heavily. After we married, things changed. Expenses increased, justified as living the life we deserve. When I tried to maintain some financial boundaries, I became the villain, stingy, controlling, not really committed to the family. That sounds familiar, I murmured. After dinner, Arthur led me to his study, a small room Ethan's mother had converted to a meditation space, but that still held Arthur's desk. Help me with the painting, he asked, pointing to a mediocre landscape on the wall. Behind it was not as safe as I expected, but a loose panel in the wall. Arthur removed it and pulled out a weatherproof document case. My real assets, he explained, spreading the contents across the desk. Investments Brenda knows nothing about, property in Vermont, accounts in the Cayman Islands from my banking days. I stared at the documents in shock. The amounts were substantial, well over $3 million in assets, entirely separate from what the family could access. Ethan and his mother have been siphoning from my known accounts for years, Arthur explained, but this they can't touch. I made sure of it. He pointed to a property deed. This house, it's not in my name or Brenda's. It's owned by one of my holding companies. They think they're inheriting it. They're not. Does Ethan know any of this? I asked, stunned by the extent of Arthur's hidden wealth. Not a cent. Even my attorney doesn't know the full picture. Only my financial advisor in Boston, and he's been sworn to secrecy. Arthur's eyes held a fierce determination I hadn't seen before. I always knew Ethan's true character. He's just like his mother, charming to your face while reaching for your wallet. I just never thought he would do the same to his wife. The next morning brought another development. A discreet visit from Emily Hayes, Arthur's attorney, a stern woman in her 60s with impeccable silver hair and penetrating green eyes. She arrived carrying a briefcase full of legal documents. So, you're the abandoned daughter-in-law, she said, assessing me with a frank gaze. Arthur called me last night, said, you were an unexpected ally. Over coffee, Emily laid out what Arthur had been working on legally, documenting the neglect, changing his will, and creating financial structures that would be ironclad against challenges. We need to finalize several documents, Emily explained. Transfers that need witnessing, medical powers of attorney, final amendments to the will. I offered to help organize the evidence Arthur had collected. My graphic design background made me good with digital organization and documentation. Perfect. Emily nodded approvingly. We'll need everything properly catalogued for when they inevitably contest the will. That evening, after Emily left with the signed documents, Arthur and I sat in the living room with a photo album he'd pulled from a bookshelf. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a photo of Ethan as a teenager, his mother behind him always whispering in his ear. He turned the page. "Here's Ethan's father before the divorce. Notice how miserable he looks. Brenda did to him what Ethan's doing to you." Page after page revealed patterns I recognized from my own marriage. Subtle control, financial manipulation, the caring facade that dropped when money was involved. "It's like seeing my own life from the outside," I whispered. Arthur nodded, understanding in his tired eyes. "That's why we need to stop them now before they do this to someone else." In that moment, our alliance solidified into something deeper than convenience or mutual benefit. We were two people who had been betrayed by the same family, now united in seeking justice. "We're not just getting revenge," Arthur said, closing the album gently. "We're making things right." I reached over and squeezed his thin hand. "Yes, for both of us." The next morning, I woke with renewed purpose. Arthur and I had stayed up late strategizing, and now it was time to put our plan into action. After checking on Arthur, who was having a relatively good day despite his condition, I made a quick breakfast and laid out our priorities. "First," I said, pouring him a cup of tea, "we need to establish the narrative of your rapid decline." Arthur nodded. "Emily mentioned her brother owns a medical supply company. He might be willing to help discreetly." One phone call later, and Emily's brother Daniel was on board. By noon, he arrived in an unmarked van with everything we needed. An oxygen tank, non-functioning but visually convincing, IV stands, monitors with detachable leads, and even a collection of empty medication vials with realistic-looking labels. Medical theater. Daniel called it with a wink as he helped us transform Arthur's bedroom into what looked like an intensive home care setup. Used to stage medical dramas sometimes. Never thought I'd be using my props for real-life drama. With Arthur's direction, I arranged the equipment for maximum visual impact. The oxygen tank was prominently displayed, IV stand positioned by the bed, various monitoring devices arranged on the bedside table. I made the bed with hospital-grade sheets Emily had also provided, completing the illusion of serious medical intervention. "Now for the photographic evidence," I said, taking out my phone. Arthur settled into bed, coaching me on how to make him appear worse than he was. "Shadows," he instructed. "Lighting from above will deepen the hollows of my face." He took off his glasses, making his eyes appear sunken, and mussed his thin hair. With minimal theatrical makeup skills from my college days, I accentuated the pallor already present in his complexion. The transformation was startling. In the photos, Arthur looked like he was actively dying, far worse than his actual condition, though that was serious enough. "You," Arthur directed. "You need to look exhausted, overwhelmed." I took off my makeup, tousled my hair, and put on an oversized sweater that made me appear smaller, more vulnerable. Arthur took several photos of me seemingly asleep in the uncomfortable chair beside his bed, others of me preparing medications with a worried expression. "Perfect," he said, reviewing the images. "Who's our target for these?" "Ethan's sister Sophia," I replied. "Your phone shows she's the only one who's texted to check on you since they left." I put together a carefully worded message to go with the pictures. "Vic had a rough night. His fever hit 102. I'm managing the pain as best I can. We'll keep you in the loop." It was direct and clinical, but had this underlying tone of worry that would make them feel guilty, or at least curious. Mel replied super fast, in just minutes. "Oh no, poor Uncle Vic, keep me updated." "Hook set," Vic whispered when I showed him her reply. Next up was my toughest act yet. I called Brad's phone, knowing he wouldn't pick up, but that his voicemail would get my message. Vic turned on the recording app on his phone to save what I said. "Brad, it's me again," I said, putting a controlled panic into my voice. "Vic's getting worse faster than we thought. The hospice nurse is worried about his breathing. Please call me back ASAP." I paused, then added with a slight tremble, "I really need your support right now." I kept making these calls every few hours, each message more urgent and each one recorded. Between calls, I made a detailed medical log with fake but realistic episodes. Things like sudden fever, pain breaking through, and trouble breathing. I backdated some entries to make it look like his decline started even before their cruise. "You should have been an actress," Vic commented when I showed him the log. "I prefer to call it creative nonfiction," I said back with a grim smile. "Every good story needs its paperwork." Around 4 p.m. that afternoon, our planning got interrupted by someone knocking on the door. I opened it to see an older woman holding a covered casserole dish. "I'm Edith Peterson from next door," she said. "Thought you might need some dinner." Taking care of Vic is a full-time job, I bet. I invited her in, thankful for the food and this unexpected chance she gave me. Over coffee, Mrs. P turned out to be a goldmine of info and support. Been watching that family for years, she confided, whispering like Vic might hear from his room, even though he was actually resting. The way they treat that poor guy. Your husband's no better than his mom, if you don't mind me saying. Not at all, I told her. I'm figuring out exactly what kind of family I married into. Mrs. P patted my hand. Vic was so good to that boy, you know. Paid for his college, got him his first car, and how does Brad pay him back? By taking off on vacation while his stepfather's dying. I let my real anger and hurt show through. They just left me a note. Just a note telling me to take care of him. That's shameful, Mrs. P declared. Absolutely shameful. You know, the whole neighborhood's noticed. Last month when Vic fell in the yard, my herald helped him up. Brad was inside watching football, totally ignored our knocking. Before she left, Mrs. P promised to tell all the neighbors that Vic needed support and visitors, while his family was selfishly enjoying their Caribbean trip. I made sure to write down what she said and the date she visited. Over the next couple of days, 5 more neighbors came by, each with their own stories of seeing Brad neglect Vic. Every visit made our case stronger and gave us more witnesses to Vic's obvious decline and the family's absence during what everyone thought were his last days. Saturday morning, Trish came back with the final papers for the asset transfers. We drove Vic to his local bank where he'd been a customer for over 30 years. The manager, Mr. Collins, gave him a warm greeting. Vic, good to see you out and about. How are you feeling? Getting my affairs in order, Richard, Vic replied, making his voice sound weaker than usual on purpose. My mind's still sharp, even if my body's giving out. In the manager's private office, Vic officially moved control of his hidden money into trusts for my benefit and for some elder care charities. Mr. Collins watched, feeling for Vic, as his shaky hands signed each paper. Your stepson was here last week, the manager casually brought up as we finished the paperwork, asking about your accounts. I reminded him he couldn't get info without the right authorization. Vic gave a faint smile. Always planning ahead, that kid. I remember when he came in to cash that check for his graduation gift, Mr. Collins went on. He didn't even thank you, just complained it wasn't enough for the car he wanted. Another piece of evidence, another witness to Brad's true colors. That evening, while we were going over our progress, Vic's phone rang with a video call from Mel. We quickly started our plan, getting Vic into bed, surrounded by medical gear, with an oxygen tube in his nose. I messed up my hair and pinched my cheeks to make my face look flushed and tired. When I answered, the camera showed me first, looking totally worn out. Oh, Jade, Mel gasped. You look awful. Is everything okay? Just managing, I said simply, then turned the phone to Vic, who gave an amazing performance of being half-conscious. He made his breathing sound really strained. Uncle Vic? Mel called. It's Mel. Can you hear me? Vic's eyes barely fluttered open. Mel, he whispered. Is that you, sweetheart? Mel's concern sounded real, but what she said next showed what she really cared about. Should we come back early? Will he make it till Monday? I turned the camera back to my face. It's hard to say. The hospice nurse thinks his body's shutting down. If you want to say goodbye, let me talk to Brad and Mom, she quickly said. The thing is, these tickets were non-refundable, and Mom's been super stressed lately. I nodded like I understood, but I was really fighting back a wave of disgust. Of course, it's just that Vic keeps asking for Brad when he's more lucid. I'll tell him to call, Mel promised. As soon as they're back from their shore excursion. After the call ended, Vic sat up and took off the oxygen tube. You got that recorded? I held up my other phone, which had recorded the whole talk. Every word. Vic's smile was satisfied, but it had a real sadness to it. My family chose their cruise tickets over saying goodbye to me. I knew this is exactly how it would go down. I sat on the edge of his bed, suddenly feeling emotional. I'm sorry, Vic. He shook his head. Don't be. Their true colors needed to come out. He reached for my hand. You know what the weirdest part is? These past few days with you, with someone who actually cares, have been better than months with them. We just sat quietly, thinking about what we'd started and what we still had to do. Our counterattack was in full swing. The trap was almost set. Now we just needed to spring it at the perfect moment. Sunday morning, I felt a slight change in the air. When I brought Vic his morning tea, I saw his hands were shaking more than usual, and there was a bluish tint around his lips that hadn't been there before. You don't have to pretend with me, I said softly, helping him sit up. You're really not feeling well today, are you? Vic's smile was faint but real. It's ironic, isn't it? After all our pretending, the real thing just sneaks up. I called the hospice nurse who used to come by every week before the family left. She said she'd come that afternoon, but gave me advice on keeping him comfortable until then. This wasn't an act anymore. Vic was really going downhill, and I suddenly felt a strong urge to protect him. Our revenge plan suddenly felt less important than making sure he was comfortable and had his dignity. What do you want for breakfast? I asked, trying to keep things normal. peaches, he said, which surprised me. Fresh peaches with cream. My late wife Martha used to make them every Sunday morning. That request sent me to 3 different grocery stores before I found decent peaches in November. When I came back and made them just like he said, perfectly sliced crescents with whipped cream, Vic's eyes got watery with the first bite. Just like she used to make, he whispered. No one's bothered to remember little things like that about me in years. All day, I found myself doing things just for Vic's comfort, not for our plan, adjusting his pillows, reading aloud from his worn-out copy of Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep, playing the classical music he said he liked. The real care that had grown between us in such a short time surprised me with how strong it felt. You know, Vic said during a lucid moment that afternoon, I haven't been treated this kindly since Martha passed away 12 years ago. It's strange how a stranger has shown me more compassion than my own family. The hospice nurse, Diane, got here around 3. After checking on Vic, she pulled me aside in the hall. His organs are shutting down, she said softly. It's happening quicker than we thought. I'd say he has hours, maybe a day at most. Even though I knew this was coming, the news hit me harder than I expected. Should I call his family? I asked, suddenly unsure about our big plan. Diane shook her head. At this point, it's about his comfort, not theirs. If they chose not to be here, she didn't finish the sentence. After she left, I sat next to Vic, who'd heard everything even though we kept our voices low. Don't call them, he said firmly. They made their choice, but we still have a few things to finalize. He reached for my hand. Call Trish. Tell her it's time for the final steps. Trish got there within the hour, bringing a notary named Thomas with her. Vic was super alert when they came in, like he was gathering all his remaining strength for this last big task. You sure you're up for this? Trish asked, worried by how he looked. More certain than ever, Vic replied. Death really clarifies what's important. They finalized the last of the paperwork, which officially transferred control of his assets to me as trustee, with specific instructions for charitable donations to elder abuse prevention groups. The new will clearly stated Brad's abandonment as why he was disinherited. Now for the letter, Vic said after signing the last paper. Trish set up her tablet to record as Vic dictated a message he wanted read to the family after he passed. What he said wasn't the angry words I might have expected, but something much more powerful, a deep disappointment and the pain of being treated like a burden, not a father. To my family, he began, his voice getting stronger with every word. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not that my being here or not seemed to matter much to you lately. He went into detail about specific times he was neglected, without blaming, just stating facts. Holidays spent alone while they were on vacation. Doctor's appointments canceled just because it was easier. He'd overheard comments about them just waiting for the old man to die. I'm not writing this out of anger, he went on, but from a clear perspective you get when you're facing the end. The biggest pain in life isn't getting sick or even dying, but realizing that the people you loved only saw you as a duty, something they had to deal with, an annoyance they had to put up with. By the time he finished, even Thomas the notary, a pro who'd probably seen tons of wills and final messages, was quietly wiping his eyes. Trish, usually so tough, reached for Vic's hand. We'll make sure they hear every word, she promised. After they left, Vic asked for his old video camera. They might question my mental state, he explained. I want to record my testimony while I'm completely lucid. I set up the camera, and Vic gave a 20-minute statement straight to the lens. He was really calm, systematically detailing years of neglect, and why he decided to leave his estate to me. Jade showed me more dignity in 4 days than my family did in 4 years. He clearly stated, she's the only one who deserves to benefit from what I spent my whole life building. He talked about specific incidents, Brad's dismissive comments at doctor's visits, meals left just out of reach, and forgetting his meds on weekend trips. The recording was devastating because of its calm delivery and damning details. By evening, Vic was losing his energy. I helped him to the living room as he asked, settling him into his favorite chair by the window. There's a bottle of port in my study, he said. It's behind the economics textbooks. Martha and I were saving it for our 50th anniversary. I found the dusty bottle where he said it was, and poured a little bit into 2 crystal glasses I found in an old cabinet. To justice, Vic said, struggling to raise his glass. To dignity, I added. We sat together as it got dark. Vic dozed off sometimes while I read to him from his favorite book. He talked off and on about Martha, his early career, and trips they planned but never took. He didn't mention Brad or his mother even once. Around midnight, I noticed his breathing changed. I put my book down and just held his hand. There was no drama, no last-minute reveals or deathbed confessions. Vic simply slipped away, his hand getting cool in mine as his breathing slowly stopped. For a long moment, I just sat there, tears streaming down my face. The man I'd only known for 4 days had somehow become important to me, way beyond just our shared goal of justice. By taking care of him, I'd found a strength and clarity I didn't know I had. At dawn, I called Diane, the hospice nurse, who came quickly to confirm what I already knew. She seemed surprised by how peaceful Vic looked. Many patients at the end show signs of distress, she commented. He just looks like he fell asleep. He did, I said quietly, reading Raymond Chandler and drinking 50-year-old port. After Diane made it official, I called the funeral home Trish had suggested. 2 serious-looking guys showed up within the hour to take Vic's body. One of them knew Vic from community events and offered real condolences. He was a good man, he said, always generous with fundraisers. Once they left, the house suddenly felt empty. I let myself grieve for a bit, then focused on the next part of our plan. Brad and his family would be back the next day, expecting to find a dying man they could comfort in his last hours, to ease their guilt about leaving him. Instead, they'd find me and face the consequences of what they did. I put Vic's letter in a cream envelope and leaned it against the family photo on the mantel. I noticed the photo showed Brad and his mom smiling big, while Vic stood a little bit apart. In the dining room, I organized all the neglect documents into clearly labeled folders: canceled doctor's visits, financial abuse, recorded proof of neglect. Vic's video testimony was all set up on the TV, ready to play with one push of a button. Finally, I went to the master bedroom and packed my few things. Next to my suitcase, I put printouts of the cruise photos Brad and his family posted all week, creating a clear visual timeline that showed their poolside drinks against Vic's documented decline. Everything was set up to hit them hard when they got back, a perfectly planned revelation that would make sure they faced the full impact of their choices. Standing in the middle of the quiet house, I felt a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about getting justice for a man who deserved way better from the people who should have cared for him most. It's done, Vic, I said softly to the empty room. They'll know exactly what they've lost. I spent Monday morning feeling strangely calm, just waiting for what was bound to happen. Around noon, I heard car doors slam, then laughter and chatting as Brad and his family got back from their cruise. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed out the simple black dress I'd bought the day before and stood in the living room near Vic's empty rocking chair. The front door flew open. Brad came in first, his mom, Elaine, right behind him, then Mel and Hannah, the colleague who was clearly more than just that. They were all tan and smiling, loaded down with duty-free bags and cheap souvenirs. "Honey, we're home," Brad called out, his voice cheerful until he saw me standing there with my serious expression. His smile faded. "What's with the funeral outfit?" Elaine pushed past him, dropping her fancy handbag on the console table. "Where's Dad? Is he napping?" Her tone was really casual, like she was asking about a pet, not her dying husband. "Vic passed away Saturday night," I said quietly. The shopping bags in Brad's hands dropped to the floor. Hannah, not sure what to do, stepped back toward the door. "What do you mean passed aways?" Elaine demanded, like I'd used the wrong word. "He died peacefully in his sleep around midnight," I calmly continued. "The funeral was yesterday afternoon. Lots of your neighbors came, along with Vic's friends from his banking days. It was actually a pretty good turnout." Brad's face showed shock, then disbelief, and then, most telling, a look of calculation. "You had the funeral without us, without his family." "His family was invited," I replied. "I left many messages about his worsening condition. You chose not to answer." Mel stepped forward, her face pale under her tan. "I told you about that call, Brad," I said. "Uncle Vic looked really bad." Brad waved her off impatiently. "This is unbelievable. We need to sit down." "Yes," I agreed. We do. I motioned to the living room where Vic's letter was on the coffee table. They silently walked in. No one wanted to sit in Vic's rocking chair, which stood empty, like an accusation. "There are some things you need to know," I said, picking up the cream-colored envelope. "Did he change his will?" Elaine cut in bluntly. "Is that what this is about?" I looked her right in the eye. "Maybe you should hear what he wrote first." I opened the letter and started reading Vic's message. His disappointment was clear in my voice. The holidays spent alone. The doctor's appointments cancelled just because it was convenient. The comments overheard about waiting for the old man to die. As I read, I watch their reactions. Elaine's face hardened, looking defensive. Brad fidgeted, not making eye contact with anyone. Mel looked more and more uncomfortable. "The greatest pain in life," I read, "isn't illness or even death, but realizing that the people you loved only saw you as a duty, a task to handle, an annoyance to put up with." When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Hannah, clearly wanting to be anywhere but here, stared at her feet. Finally, Brad cleared his throat. Look, Dad was confused at the end. His medication. Vic was perfectly lucid, I cut in. Actually, he made a video statement you might want to watch. This is ridiculous, Elaine declared. Some old man's end-of-life ramblings won't change anything legally. Brad is his next of kin, and actually, I said, standing up, there's more you should see. I took them to the dining room where I'd set up the evidence files. Brad's eyes got wide as he saw the detailed documents laid out in order. What is all this? He demanded. Evidence, I simply replied. Talking about financial exploitation, medical neglect, and abandonment. I opened the first folder, which showed bank statements with highlighted transfers. Oliver kept really detailed records of every dollar taken from his accounts for supposed care that was never actually given. Chloe grabbed one of the statements. He gave us that money, you know. We were taking care of him by just leaving him alone for Thanksgiving with not enough meds, no food in the fridge, and the heat set at 62 degrees. I asked, while opening another folder that had their departure plans and timeline. There are statements from 6 different neighbors who saw him being neglected. And then, check this out. I hit play on the tablet, and Oliver's video testimony started. His calm, clear description of years of mistreatment even quieted Chloe's complaints. Leo's face got paler and paler as Oliver talked about specific things that happened. Meds were diluted, appointments got cancelled, and they'd make mean comments when they thought he couldn't hear. This is totally a setup, Leo finally blurted out, pointing a finger at me. She messed with a dying man. The doorbell rang before I even had a chance to answer. Talk about perfect timing. Eleanor was at the doorstep, with Notary Miller right next to her. Am I interrupting something? She asked, very professionally. Not at all, I told her. The family just got back and they were looking over Oliver's last message. Great. Then I can go ahead with the official notification. Eleanor set her briefcase on the dining table and pulled out some documents. As the executor of Oliver Harmon's estate, I'm here to tell you about his last will and testament. Leo straightened up, trying to compose himself. A really smug smile started to appear on his face. All right, let's just get to the main point. Eleanor adjusted her glasses. The will is pretty simple and clear. Oliver Harmon left everything he owned to Jessica Green, and he also made arrangements for big donations to several organizations that prevent elder abuse. Chloe's loud, high-pitched voice broke the shocked silence that followed. No way! That can't be right. We're his family. The will clearly states that abandonment and neglect are why you're disinherited. Eleanor calmly went on. It's been properly witnessed, notarized, and filed with the court, so it's all official. Mr. Harmon was checked by 2 different doctors who confirmed he was mentally sound when he signed. Leo's smug look just vanished. This is totally fraud. We're gonna fight it. You're welcome to try, Eleanor said, completely calm. But honestly, with all the neglect documents, the video testimony, and witness statements, I'd really advise against it. You'd just be spending money you don't actually have. What do you mean, money we don't have? Chloe snapped. Eleanor gave me a quick look before she kept talking. The properties you're currently living in, including your main home, are part of the Harmon Family Trust, which is now controlled by Jessica as the trustee. Plus, the investment accounts you've been taking money from are now frozen, waiting for an audit to check for possible financial abuse. Leo's face went completely white. That's impossible. The house is mine, you know. Dad promised me. Oliver never promised anything. I jumped in. You just assumed. That's a big difference. The full meaning of it was really sinking in now. Leo had blown all their savings on the cruise, banking on his inheritance to take care of their growing debts. The house they lived in wasn't even his to sell or get a loan against. What about our college money? Sarah asked, her voice quiet. Grandpa set those up for us. Leo couldn't even look his sister in the eye. Eleanor replied softly. Oliver gave your father money for that a few years back, but those accounts were never actually set up. Sarah turned to Leo, and a look of horror spread across her face. You used our college money. The family just exploded into a bunch of accusations and denials. Emily quietly snuck out the front door, getting away from the chaos. I let the craziness go on for a few minutes, then stepped away to grab my suitcase from the bedroom. When I came back, Leo followed me into the hallway, and he seemed totally different. Jessica, please, he begged, his voice cracking. We can fix this. I messed up with Emily. It was nothing really. We can start fresh. I'll change. I promise. I looked at this man I used to love and saw him clearly, maybe for the very first time. Behind his good looks and smooth charm was someone who only ever cared about himself, not me or anyone else. I calmly took off my wedding ring and put it in his hand, then added the keys to our apartment. You left him there to die, I said softly. Now you get nothing, and that includes me. I walked toward the door, holding my suitcase. Leo's begging turned into threats as he followed me. You're not gonna get away with this. I'll fight you in court. You messed with a sick old man. At the door, I turned back for a second. Everything was done by the book. You taught me one really important lesson in our marriage, Leo. Always keep your receipts. I stepped outside into the bright November sun. Behind me, I could hear Leo still protesting and Chloe angrily demanding Eleanor explain how this could have happened. But those voices were already fading away, becoming part of a past I was moving on from. Eleanor had set up a room for me at a quiet hotel while I figured out what to do next. As I put my suitcase in the car's trunk, Mrs. Davis showed up on her porch across the street. She gave me a knowing nod and a little wave. I waved back, and even though the past few days had been really tough emotionally, I felt surprisingly lighter. Oliver's last gift wasn't just money, even though that would definitely help me get my life back together. The real gift was the clear perspective and strength I found while helping him get justice. As I drove away from the house and the broken family inside, I wasn't thinking about revenge or even clearing my name. I was thinking about getting a second chance, about living well to honor Oliver, and about the unexpected connection that grew between two people who were thrown away by those who should have cared about them most. Oliver had found his peace. Now it was my turn to do the same. Thanks for sticking with the story till the very end. My favorite part was when Oliver shared his special port wine that he'd saved for an anniversary he never got to celebrate. There was such a mix of sad and dignified feelings in that glass. Which part of the story hit you the hardest? I really appreciate every comment where you share what you think.